So throughout this pandemic, there's been this ongoing national conversation about how fast the economy needs to be reopened. And the focus seems to always be on making sure the corporations are making profits. And sometimes there's sort of vague assertions that we need to make sure that people are keeping their jobs. But the actual condition of those jobs, the way people are being treated during this pandemic, is very rarely anything of a focus for our government. And we're gonna hopefully correct that a little bit in this segment, because we're very lucky to be joined by the president of One Fair Wage, Saru Jairaman. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you on and to talk about this report that your organization put together, talking about both health risks as well as different forms of harassment that service industry employees have been experiencing. So tell me a little bit about what you found in this study.
So some of this stuff was not surprising because of what we know about the industry, what we knew about the industry prior to the pandemic. I like to say that the industry had a pre-existing condition prior to the pandemic. The restaurant industry prior to the pandemic was the nation's second largest and fastest growing employer, but also the absolute lowest paying. And that is partly historical. It's due to the money, power, and influence of the trade lobby, which we call the other NRA. It's the National Restaurant Association, which has been around, it turns out, since emancipation of slavery, when it first demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, namely Black women, not pay them anything and have them live entirely on tips, which was a mutation of the original concept of tipping. Tipping had originated in feudal Europe as an extra or bonus on top of a wage, but it changed to a replacement for wages because of slavery in the United States, because restaurants did not want to pay Black women in particular. And that became law in 1938 as part of the New Deal. Everybody got the right to the minimum wage for the first time, except for three groups of Black workers: farm workers, domestic workers, and tipped restaurant workers, who went from a $0 wage in 1938 all the way up to the absurd and ridiculous federal minimum wage for tipped workers of $2.13 an hour in 2020. And that was the source of the fact that the restaurant industry had the highest rates of economic instability and sexual harassment of any industry in the United States prior to the pandemic. A mostly female workforce of tipped workers was forced to put up with whatever customers did to them, however they touched them or treated them or talked to them, because the customers were paying their bills, not their employers. There were 7 states that did it differently, including where I live in California. They always provided a full minimum wage with tips on top. We found that those states have had 1/2 the rate of harassment in the industry, just proving that when you pay workers a full minimum wage, they don't feel as dependent on customers. That power dynamic that exists between women servers and male customers isn't as great when they get a full minimum wage. Well, that power dynamic got so much worse during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, 60% of these workers couldn't get unemployment insurance because most states told them their wages were too low to qualify for benefits. And then when they went back to work, they went back to work for a sub-minimum wage, and tips were down 50 to 75% because sales are down. And here you are, you're a worker, you've gone back to work, you've been unemployed for months with no benefits. If you can only get 50 to 25 to 50% of the tips you used to get, every tip becomes more important. Every customer has more power over you because you rely so much more on those tips. And so workers in this study reported that they are exposing themselves to great risk. They are having to do more for less. They're now having to act as public health marshals, enforcing social distancing and mask rules for far less money in tips. And in fact, they said, if we try to enforce these rules, we get less money in tips. Therefore, we feel reluctant to enforce these rules. And that is a public health disaster for both them and the public. Even worse, 40% of the workers reported an increase in sexual harassment during the pandemic, and hundreds of women submitted comments that male customers said to them along the lines of, take your mask off so I can see how cute you are and determine your tip on that basis. Essentially, expose yourself to the virus so I can determine whether I like you, whether I want to tip you, whether I am going to let you have income today. And so sexual harassment and the sub-minimum wage in our industry went from being unjust, racially unjust, sexually, gender-wise, and injustice, to becoming literally a matter of life and death.
Wow, there's already a lot there, and this to everyone watching this, the One Fair Wage, the study is available, and you can see that comments like you just said, there are many of them. I think reasonable person can't imagine someone doing that. But as you pointed out, this is not a brand new thing. This is like an acceleration of what had already been. And of course, I want to focus on first the COVID, because you're talking about expose yourself to the virus. But of course, they are, by virtue of the fact that they have to work when many probably would prefer not to have to.
That's right.
Are being exposed every day to many people who might not be wearing masks. And even if they are, they're being exposed to far more people than most of us who might get to work from home and all of that. And I'm assuming that has led to COVID cases and probably deaths in the service industry, correct?
Nearly half of the more than 2,000 workers we surveyed, nearly half said somebody at least one person in the restaurant got COVID. And I was shocked by the data point that a third said they knew somebody had died. That is insane. But it's not surprising when you read the CDC report from September that shows that restaurants are the most dangerous place to be during the pandemic. In fact, CDC reported in September that adults are twice as likely to get COVID by eating in a restaurant. Now imagine working in a restaurant and all day long workers reported, 90% of workers said, almost every shift I'm coming into contact with people who aren't wearing masks, less than 6 feet apart. Lots of people. It's a very, very dangerous environment. Like you said, most workers would choose not to go back to work because it's so dangerous. Those that are going back to work feel they have no other choice, and they're very reliant on these tips to survive. And what they're finding is that harassment has gone up, but so has hostility. When these workers are trying to enforce these rules, they're being met with very aggressive responses, very aggressive rejection of the notion of wearing a mask when you go to the bathroom or sitting 6 feet apart. So the workers are saying, if they're gonna not tip me or respond in a harassing or aggressive way, there is no way I can enforce these rules, which is crazy because given the CDC report, we rely on these workers to enforce these rules if we don't want restaurants to be the source of a massive increase in cases.
Exactly. Yeah, and I would remind the audience, by the way, through the course of the pandemic, we've shown any number of the videos that have gone viral of people harassing those working at grocery stores and at restaurants and things like that. For every person that filmed themselves doing it, there are obviously many that did not. And yeah, that experience on top of all the other dangers, the fear that some irresponsible person is gonna get you sick. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.